The busy restaurant was alive that night. Golden lights glowed above every table, casting soft shadows on the walls. The sound of cutlery touching plates mixed with quiet laughter and gentle music. The air smelled of grilled steak, fresh bread, and sweet desserts. It was the kind of place where families celebrated, couples shared quiet moments, and friends came together to talk about their lives. The waiters moved quickly across the floor. Their trays were heavy with glasses of water, bowls of soup, and tall plates stacked with food. Shoes tapped softly against the polished wooden floor. Everyone seemed busy, yet every small movement fit together like part of a rhythm dot at the front. Near the wide glass window, a tall man entered. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a plain shirt, and a jacket that seemed too ordinary for his size. His shoulders were wide, and his presence filled the doorway, but his steps were slow and calm. People noticed him right away. A few whispered, some glanced twice. Others nudged their friends quietly. It was Big Shaq. He did not come with noise or pride. He walked gently, as if he wanted no one to notice. His eyes scanned the room, looking for peace, not attention. Finally, he found a quiet table by the window and sat down. The chair creaked slightly under his weight, but he did not mind. He placed his large hands on the table, folded them, and waited. The other guests continued their conversations, though some still stared. A group of teenagers at the back giggled, hiding behind their menus. A couple whispered to each other, their eyes flicking toward him. The restaurant was used to important people visiting, but there was something different about seeing a man so large sitting quietly, ordering nothing yet. At the service station, near the kitchen door, a young waiter noticed him. The waiter was tired. His face carried the stress of long hours. His arms ached from carrying heavy trays. He had already served too many demanding guests that evening, and his patience was thin. When he saw Shaq, his lips curled into a small smirk. He leaned closer to another waiter and whispered, "Look at that guy. He probably eats the whole menu by himself." The other waiter frowned but said nothing. The young waiter laughed under his breath, shaking his head, and picked up his notepad. He straightened his apron and walked toward the table with a forced smile. Shaq lifted his head and greeted him with a gentle nod. His voice was deep, calm, almost kind. "Good evening." The waiter tilted his head and replied, "Good evening, sir. Do you need an extra chair, or maybe two, for comfort?" His words sounded polite on the surface, but the smirk in his eyes carried the truth. A couple at the next table heard it. They shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice. A small laugh escaped from the teenagers at the back. Shaq did not respond with anger. He smiled faintly and looked back at the menu. "I'll have grilled chicken," he said softly, "and just water, please." The waiter raised his eyebrows. "Only that? I thought a man like you would order 5 plates. His voice was louder now, almost inviting others to hear. A few heads turned, some guests pretending to hide their smiles behind glasses of wine. Shaq lowered his eyes to the table. His face showed no anger, but inside, a small pain grew. He had walked in hoping for a quiet meal, but instead, he had become a target for laughter. Still, he stayed calm. He did not want to make a scene. The waiter scribbled quickly on his notepad and walked away. Still smirking, Shaq sat back in his chair, breathing slowly. Through the glass window, the night outside looked peaceful, cars passing by, streetlights shining, people walking in the cool air. Inside, though, the warmth of the restaurant felt weaker now, as if shadows had grown longer around his table. When the food arrived, the plate was placed in front of him without care. The waiter set it down with a little thud, almost as if mocking the weight of the man he served. "Here you go," he said, his tone still sharp. Shaq looked at the chicken, steaming gently under the lights, and whispered, "Thank you." His words were sincere, even though he felt the sting of disrespect. He picked up his fork and knife and began to eat slowly. Every bite was calm, careful. He tried to enjoy the taste, but each word of mockery echoed in his mind. Around him, laughter and chatter filled the air, but at his table, silence sat heavy. The waiter passed by again, glancing at his plate, under his breath. "Just loud enough for Shaq to hear," he muttered. "Better hope we don't run out of food tonight." Shaq paused for a moment, holding his fork in the air. His eyes closed briefly. He breathed in, then out, choosing patience over anger. Across the restaurant, a little boy tugged at his mother's hand and pointed at Shaq. "Mom, he looks like a giant." The mother quickly hushed him, embarrassed, but Shaq gave the boy a small smile, soft and kind. The night went on. Waiters hurried, plates clanked, Music floated through the air. Yet at that corner table, a quiet story was unfolding. A man had come in peace to eat and leave, but the weight of judgment had already begun to turn a simple dinner into something deeper. And though no one knew it yet, this restaurant, filled with laughter and light, was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. The mockery of the restaurant grew louder as the evening went on. New guests entered, waiters hurried faster, and the smell of roasted meat, garlic butter, and sweet cakes filled the air. Glasses clinked as people toasted. Laughter rolled from one table to another, to most. It was a beautiful night. But at Shaq's table, the mood was heavy. The young waiter returned, holding a jug of water. His footsteps were quick, but his eyes carried the same sharp smirk as before. He poured water into Shaq's glass, letting it spill slightly over the edge. A few drops ran down the side of the glass onto the table. "Oops," the waiter said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Guess the glass wasn't big enough. Maybe we should bring you a bucket instead." Some guests close by chuckled under their breath. A woman nudged her husband, whispering something. Both of them glancing at Shaq. The teenagers at the back giggled again, their eyes watching every moment. Shaq looked at the water dripping across the table. He didn't complain. He simply took the napkin and cleaned the spot gently. His movements slow and calm. His silence was strong, but inside, his heart sank. The waiter leaned on the table, pretending to check the cutlery. "Need a bigger knife. 2, or maybe the forks, just to keep up with the food." Shaq raised his eyes this time. His deep, calm gaze met the waiter's smirk. He did not say a word, but the quiet weight in his eyes was enough to make the waiter blink and look away quickly. Still, the young man covered his nervousness with a forced laugh and walked off. Shaq continued eating. Each bite of chicken was tender and warm, but the taste was lost under the bitter flavor of humiliation. The restaurant around him felt different now, colder, harsher. The music that once sounded soft now seemed far away. He noticed a little girl at another table staring at him. She looked no older than 7, her big eyes full of curiosity. When Shaq caught her gaze, she smiled shyly. He smiled back, a kind smile, and for a moment, his heart softened. But then the waiter returned again. This time he brought the bread basket. He placed it roughly on the table, the basket shaking. "Careful," the waiter said loudly, his voice carrying across a few tables. "Wouldn't want the bread to disappear before anyone else gets a piece." The chuckles came again. The laughter this time was stronger. Even those who did not laugh turned their heads, pretending to look at menus or their food. But their eyes were watching. Shaq's shoulders tightened. He kept his face calm, but deep inside, a storm was building. He had lived a life where respect was earned, where kindness was rare. He knew what it meant to be mocked. But tonight, he wasn't just any man at a restaurant. He was a man who came to rest, to breathe, and instead, he was being stripped of dignity piece by piece. Still, he stayed silent. His fork touched the plate, cutting slowly. He thought of saying something, of ending it there, but his patience was strong. He wanted to see how far this young man would go. The waiter returned once more, now with a pitcher of juice for another table. But when he passed Shaq, he stopped suddenly and looked down at him with fake concern. "Doing okay there? Need a second table to hold everything." His tone was playful, but sharp like a knife. Gasps filled the air. This time, not everyone laughed. Some guests frowned. An older couple shook their heads. A man at the bar muttered, "That's too much." But the teenagers laughed the loudest, slapping the table, enjoying the show. The waiter's chest swelled with pride at their reaction. He thought he was clever, powerful. He thought he was the one in control. Shaq's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down gently, his hands folding on the table. His face stayed calm, but his eyes grew darker, deeper. For the first time, the waiter felt a strange chill. He looked away quickly and walked back to the kitchen, though his smirk was fading. Shaq sat still for a moment, breathing in slowly. His thoughts were heavy. Why must respect be so hard? Why must people find joy in tearing others down? He looked out the window again. Outside, the night seemed peaceful. Streetlights glowed, cars passed, and people walked without knowing what was happening inside this place. The contrast was sharp: outside peace, inside cruelty. A waitress carrying drinks passed near him and whispered softly, "I'm sorry, sir. He shouldn't treat you like that." Her voice was quiet, almost hidden, but it carried kindness. Shaq gave her a small nod, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he said gently. Those two words meant more than she could know. The young waiter returned one last time, this time carrying the bill folder. He placed it on the table before Shaq had even finished. His meal. Here you go, he said with a smirk. Didn't want to keep you waiting. I know you must be hungry for more. Somewhere else. The words struck like stones. The restaurant grew silent for a moment. The laughter was gone now, replaced by awkwardness. Guests looked down at their plates. Some shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the line had been crossed. Shaq looked at the bill folder, then back at the waiter. His deep eyes held steady, strong. He said nothing, but the air around him grew heavier. The waiter felt it, the weight of something he did not understand yet, as Shaq slowly rose from his chair. Towering over the tables, the whole restaurant seemed to pause. Even the music, soft and distant, seemed to fade into silence. The storm inside him was no longer hidden. The night was about to change. The uneasy dinner of the restaurant was full. But at Shaq's table, there was a silence that felt heavier than the noise around him. The lights above glowed warmly on polished glasses and silver cutlery. Yet the glow did not reach his heart. The laughter of other tables rang clear. But for him, every sound carried a sharp edge, reminding him of the waiters. Words. The grilled chicken sat half-eaten before him. He cut each piece slowly, chewing with patience. But every bite tasted less of food and more of humiliation. The breadbasket lay at the side, untouched. The water glass was half empty, a small drop still sliding down the side of the glassware. The waiter had spilled it earlier. To anyone watching, Shaq looked calm, but inside, his chest felt tight. The young waiter circled the room again. His smile widened at other guests, his voice soft and cheerful. But when his eyes drifted toward Shaq, his expression turned sharp. He leaned toward another table to pour wine and whispered something. Glancing quickly at Shaq's back, the guests at that table forced small laughs, their faces caught between amusement and discomfort. At the corner near the bar, an older man sipped his drink and shook his head. He had seen enough to know this was wrong, but he stayed silent, like many others. The room was full of eyes, but none were brave enough to speak up. Shaq noticed all of it. He was a man who could read a room with a glance. He saw the eyes that pitied him, the lips that smirked, the shoulders that turned away. His heart grew heavier. He wondered why kindness was so rare, why respect was given only to those who showed their wealth or power. The music shifted to a softer tune. A piano played gently, the notes floating like drops of rain. For a moment, Shaq closed his eyes, letting the sound steady his heart. He told himself to breathe, to stay calm, to let the night pass without anger. But the waiter did not stop. When Shaq set his fork down for a moment, the young man appeared suddenly with a wide grin. Everything okay, sir? Or should we order a second round already? I mean, for a man your size. One chicken can't be enough. This time, the laughter did not come so easily. A woman at a nearby table frowned. A man at another table muttered to his wife, "That's just rude." But the teenagers in the back still found it funny, their giggles spilling across the room. Shaq lifted his eyes slowly, meeting the waiter's smirk with silence. His gaze was deep, unshaken. The waiter felt it again, that strange heaviness, that quiet authority, but he pushed it aside with a nervous laugh and hurried away. Shaq's hands rested on the table. His large fingers touched the napkin, folding and unfolding it, a small action to keep his patience alive. His thoughts moved like waves. Should I leave? Should I teach him a lesson? Or should I simply finish and walk away? He looked again out the window. The street outside glowed under soft yellow lamps. A family walked past holding hands, their faces bright with laughter. The world outside seemed kind, almost gentle, while inside this room cruelty sat close to his table. Just then, the little girl who had been staring before leaned toward him again. Her parents were busy talking, but she looked at Shaq with wide, innocent eyes. She whispered across the space, her voice tiny but clear, "You're like a giant in a fairy tale." Shaq smiled faintly. A soft warmth touched his heart. "Maybe. A gentle giant," he whispered back with a wink. The girl giggled and hid her face, her small laugh like a candle in the dark. That moment gave him strength. He picked up his fork again, finishing the last bites of his chicken slowly. But even with that small kindness, the air of the room pressed heavily around him. He could feel people's stares, their curiosity, their whispers. The young waiter came back again, this time carrying dessert for another table. But he stopped once more near Shaq. He tilted his head, pretending to be thoughtful. "You sure you don't want dessert? We've got chocolate cake, but Well, I don't think a slice would be enough for you. A hush fell over the nearest tables. No one laughed this time. The cruelty had gone too far. The waiter realized the silence, but his pride refused to let him step back. Shaq set his knife and fork down. His plate was empty now. Slowly, he reached for the glass of water and took a long sip. He set it back on the table with care. The sound of the glass against wood echoing louder than expected. His eyes lifted. He did not speak, but the silence that followed was sharper than words. The waiter shifted on his feet, suddenly uncertain. The smirk on his face faltered. Shaq rose slightly in his chair, then leaned back again. His calm was not weakness, it was strength, a strength that carried weight heavier than anger. Those who watched could feel it. The air was thicker now. The manager, busy near the kitchen door, finally noticed the tension and began to move toward Shaq's table. The waiter saw him coming and straightened quickly, trying to hide his behavior with a fake polite smile. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The uneasy dinner had already turned into something else, something deeper, something unforgettable. And as Shaq folded his napkin and placed it neatly on the table, he knew the night was not yet over. The lesson was only beginning. The Turning Point restaurant carried on with its rhythm, plates clattering, laughter rising and falling, waiters weaving between tables. Yet something about the air had changed. Around Shaq's corner, silence seemed to grow heavier, like a shadow stretching across the room. He had finished his food. The plate was empty, the napkin folded neatly, the glass of water half full. His massive figure sat calm and steady, but everyone close by could sense a quiet storm gathering. They didn't know when it would break, but they felt it coming. The young waiter, however, did not notice. Pride blinded him. The smirks, the whispers, the little jokes. He thought he was clever, thought he had control. He believed Shaq's silence meant defeat. He believed the laughter earlier meant the whole restaurant was on his side. But as the waiter passed by with another tray, he caught Shaq's steady gaze again. This time, there was no smile, no flicker of patience, only a stillness that felt heavy and unshakable. The waiter's step slowed. For the first time that evening, his chest tightened, but still, he forced himself to walk past, holding his chin high. At another table, a woman whispered to her husband, "That man hasn't said a word. He's holding it all inside." Her husband nodded slowly, and when he speaks, it's going to matter. The piano music in the background softened, its notes almost drowned by the restless shifting of chairs and glasses. It was as if the whole restaurant was leaning toward that corner, waiting. Finally, Shaq moved. He pushed his chair back slightly, the sound echoing through the wooden floor. It was not loud, but it was sharp, like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Every head nearby turned. The laughter from the teenagers in the back died instantly. The waiter froze in place. Shaq stood up slowly. His towering frame rose above the tables, casting a shadow under the golden lights. His height and presence made the room feel smaller, as if the walls had closed in. He adjusted his jacket calmly, his movements controlled, deliberate. The young waiter swallowed hard, his smirk gone now. His palms began to sweat. Still, he tried to cover his fear with false politeness. "Is everything okay, sir? Did you not enjoy the meal?" His voice cracked slightly. Shaq looked down at him. His deep eyes held no anger, but they held something far more powerful: disappointment. A disappointment so heavy it pressed against the waiter's chest, making it hard for him to breathe. Shaq's voice finally broke the silence. It was deep, calm, steady. "Call the manager." Gasps moved through the room. Guests exchanged glances, whispering quietly. The weight of those 3 words hung in the air. The waiter's stomach turned. For a second, he thought of arguing, of saying the manager was busy. But when he looked into Shaq's eyes, he knew better. He nodded quickly, almost stumbling as he turned and hurried toward the kitchen door. His pride was gone, replaced by fear. The manager, a middle-aged man with kind but tired eyes, walked out. Moments later, adjusting his tie nervously, he knew trouble when he saw it, and the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He moved quickly toward Shaq, bowing his head slightly. "Good evening, sir. I understand there's an issue." Shaq looked around the restaurant before answering. His gaze swept across the guests, across the whispering faces, across the waiter, who now stood frozen near the wall. When he finally spoke, his words carried weight, not volume. "Yes," Shaq said, "there's an issue, not with the food, not with the lights or the music, or the service of most here. He paused. His eyes landed firmly on the waiter. The issue is respect. The room went silent. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses all seemed to fade away. Everyone's ears were fixed on his words. I came here tonight quietly, Shaq continued. His deep voice flowed through the room like a slow drumbeat. I came to eat, to rest, to be just another guest. But instead, I was mocked, laughed at, treated as less than human. The waiter's face turned pale. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Shaq stepped closer, his shadow falling across the young man. You saw only what you wanted to see, my size, my silence. You thought it gave you the right to tear me down, to make me into a joke. But what? You forgot. He paused, letting the silence stretch long enough for hearts to pound. Is that every person who walks into this place deserves dignity? A woman at the corner table whispered softly. He's right. Shaq's eyes returned to the manager. And if this is how you allow your guests to be treated, then I must question the heart of this restaurant. The manager's face flushed red with shame. He bowed deeply. Sir, I am truly sorry. This is not who we are. This is not who we wish to be. Shaq looked down at the folded napkin on his table, then back at the waiter. His final words struck harder than any shout could have. Respect should never depend on knowing who someone is. It should be given because they are human. The waiter's eyes filled with tears. His pride cracked. His shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The restaurant remained silent, every guest frozen. In their seat, the turning point had come. The storm had broken, not with rage, but with truth. And though none of them knew it yet, the night still held one more revelation, one that would leave the entire room in awe. The truth revealed at the restaurant had fallen into a strange silence. Forks rested untouched on plates. Glasses sat half-raised, forgotten in people's hands. Even the soft piano music seemed too faint to be real. All eyes were on Shaq, the towering man who had finally spoken after so much silence. The waiter stood stiff near the wall, his smirk gone, his face pale. The manager remained bowed slightly, sweat forming at his temples. The guests, once entertained by mockery, now sat with shame tightening in their throats. Shaq looked around slowly, his deep eyes sweeping the room. He was calm, but his calmness carried a heavy weight. Each word he spoke landed like a stone on still water, rippling through every corner. I came here tonight as a guest, he said. I asked for nothing more than a quiet meal, but instead of kindness, I received insults. Instead of respect, I was treated as less. The manager nodded quickly. Sir, I assure you, this is not who we are. I will deal with this immediately. His voice trembled, desperate to contain the damage. Shaq did not respond right away. He placed his large hands on the back of his chair, steadying himself. Then he spoke again. You speak of who you are, but the truth of a place is not in its walls or its food. It is in how it treats the weakest guest, the quietest customer, the person who seems to hold no power. A murmur spread across the tables. People shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, knowing his words carried truth. The young waiter's lips parted, as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. His chest rose and fell quickly. His earlier confidence had turned to ashes. Shaq stepped closer to the center of the room now. His frame loomed large, but his voice remained calm. He spoke not just to the manager or the waiter, but to everyone watching. Many of you laughed, he said. You heard the jokes, the insults, and you laughed. Not because it was right, but because it was easy. It is easy to laugh at another man's pain. It is easy to stay silent when someone is mocked, but easy choices leave heavy scars. The guests lowered their heads. Some pressed their lips together, ashamed. The little girl who had smiled at Shaq earlier clutched her mother's hand tighter, her wide eyes fixed on him. Then came the moment no one expected. Shaq took a slow breath, his chest rising like a mountain before he spoke. His words came deep, steady, and undeniable. You think I'm only a guest here, but this place— He paused, letting the silence stretch, making every ear lean closer. This restaurant belongs to me. Gasps filled the air like a wave crashing against the shore. The sound moved from table to table, from the bar to the back corner. People whispered in disbelief, their voices sharp with shock. The waiter's knees felt weak. His eyes widened as the truth hit him. His mind replayed every word he had spoken, every cruel joke, every smirk. Each memory stabbed him now, heavy with regret. The manager froze. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. You own this restaurant? His voice cracked with fear and astonishment. Shaq's eyes met his firmly. Yes, I built it. I chose its name. I shaped every detail, from the lights above to the food you serve. I wanted it to be a place of warmth, a place where anyone could sit and feel valued. But tonight, his voice lowered, filled with quiet sorrow. Tonight it became a place of mockery. The silence deepened. Some guests covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. The young waiter finally spoke, his voice trembling. I didn't know, sir. I swear. I didn't know. Shaq raised a hand, silencing him gently but firmly. That is exactly the point. You did not know, and yet you mocked. You did not know, and yet you judged. Respect should not depend on knowledge of power or wealth. It should be given because every soul deserves it. Tears burned at the waiter's eyes. His pride shattered completely. I am so sorry, he whispered, his head bowing low. Shaq studied him for a long moment. His expression was unreadable strong, but not cruel. Then he looked back at the guests. Let tonight be remembered, he said, not as the night a man was mocked, but as the night a lesson was learned. Kindness is never wasted. Cruelty is never forgotten. The words echoed in the hearts of everyone present. A woman at the far table dabbed her eyes with a napkin. A man who had laughed earlier now bowed his head in shame. The little girl whispered softly, "He's a king," and her mother hushed her gently, though even she felt the truth in those words. The manager stepped forward, voice breaking. "Sir, please forgive us. Please forgive this mistake. We will do everything to make it right." Shaq looked at him, then at the trembling waiter. For a moment, he did not speak. The weight of the silence pressed on every chest. Then he gave a slow nod. "I will not destroy this place for one man's mistake," he said. "But this place must change. Its heart must change." The manager nodded furiously, relief mixing with fear. "Yes, sir, it will. I promise you." Shaq picked up the folded bill folder from the table, placed a crisp note inside, and set it back down. His deep voice cut through the silence one last time. Respect is the real payment. Without it, no restaurant, no home, no life can stand. With that, he turned and began walking toward the door. His steps were steady, his back straight, his presence filling the room like a final echo of thunder after a storm. Every guest watched him go, their hearts heavy, their minds changed. The truth had been revealed. The lesson had begun to take root. The lessened heavy glass doors closed softly behind Shaq as he stepped out into the night. For a long moment, the restaurant stayed frozen, as if the very air had been emptied. The golden lights still glowed, the piano still played faintly, but the mood was completely changed. Inside, no one spoke at first. Guests looked at one another, unsure what to say. The waiter stood near the wall, his head bowed low, his apron clutched tightly in his hands. The manager wiped his forehead with a napkin, his face pale, his breathing uneven. The silence felt louder than the laughter that had filled the room earlier. Finally, a woman at the corner table broke the stillness. She whispered, "We all saw it. We all heard it. We let it happen." Her words were soft, but they cut through the air like glass. The man beside her lowered his head, ashamed. Another guest murmured, "He was mocked in front of us, and we did nothing." The truth was painful. Every person in that room knew they had played a part. Some had laughed. Some had looked away. Some had stayed silent when kindness was needed most. The young waiter's chest rose and fell quickly. His eyes burned with shame. He had begun the mockery with easy words, but now those same words felt like chains around his heart. He replayed them in his mind. Extra chair, bigger knife, bucket instead of a glass. Each memory hit harder, each word more cruel than the last. He wanted to run, but his legs would not move. He wanted to hide, but there was no corner dark enough to cover the weight of his mistake. The manager finally stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Everyone, please forgive what happened tonight. This restaurant was built to be a place of respect, of welcome, of warmth. We failed that tonight. I failed that." He turned toward the waiter, his expression a mix of anger and pity. "You thought you were making jokes. You thought you were clever. But you wounded a man who gave you this very job, who opened these doors for you. Do you understand the weight of what you've done?" Tears rolled down the young man's face. He nodded quickly. "I understand. I thought I was being funny. I didn't think about how it felt. I was wrong. So wrong? His voice cracked, broken by regret. A murmur spread among the guests. Some nodded, others sighed. Still shaken by the revelation, one older man raised his hand and said, "We all owe him more than silence. We should have spoken up. Maybe then it wouldn't have gone so far." The little girl, still holding her mother's hand, looked around with wide eyes and whispered, "He was kind, even when they weren't." Her small voice carried across the tables, simple but powerful. Her words struck deep. Guests nodded slowly, their shame turning into reflection. The waiter wiped his face with the edge of his sleeve. He looked at the table where Shaq had sat. The folded napkin, the half-full glass of water, and the untouched breadbasket remained. The chair looked almost too big for anyone else, as if it still carried the weight of the giant who had sat there. He walked to the table slowly, his steps heavy. He touched the napkin, lifting it gently. "I mocked him," he whispered to himself, his voice breaking. And he still spoke with calm. He still showed me respect when I gave him none. The manager placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take this lesson, son. Let it change you. Let it humble you. Never again speak without thinking. Never again use laughter to wound another's soul." The waiter nodded, his tears falling freely now. "I will never forget this night." The guests began to talk quietly, their voices filled with reflection. A woman told her husband, "We must be better, not just here, but everywhere. We cannot wait to see who someone is before we show kindness." Another man said softly, "I feel ashamed, but maybe this shame can be the start of change." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted again. Where there had been cruelty, now there was awareness. Where there had been laughter at another's expense, now there was silence heavy with guilt, but also with hope. The manager raised his voice one last time. "From tonight forward, let this place carry a new heart. Let it not be known only for its food or its lights, but for its respect for every person who walks through its doors." The guests clapped softly, not out of celebration, but out of agreement, a vow to themselves and to one another. Outside, Shaq walked down the quiet street. The night air was cool against his face. The city lights blinked softly in the distance. His steps were calm, his heart steady. He did not need to look back. He knew the lesson had been planted. For him, it was not about anger or revenge. It was about truth, about showing that respect is the foundation of every place, every home, every life. Without it, walls may stand, but hearts will fall. As he disappeared into the night, the restaurant behind him glowed with golden light, but inside, the hearts of the people glowed brighter. For they would never forget the night a waiter mocked a man, only to discover he had mocked the very owner of the house he served. And they would never forget the lesson that respect must be given freely, not because of who someone is, but because of what they are: human.